All right, man, peace. So James Harden, the superstar shooting guard of the Houston Rockets, seems to be on his way to his first ever NBA regular season MVP award. As we all know, the referendum on James Harden is awaiting him in this year's playoffs. In the meantime, Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, has stated that he believes that James Harden is the greatest isolation player, meaning the greatest one-on-one offensive player in NBA history. Of course, Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman are going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Yeah, they do. Trevor, appreciate you. James Harden, arguably the runaway MVP in the NBA this season, but Rockets GM Daryl Morey took things a step further.
I don't think that James Harden is arguably this season's MVP. I believe that it's pretty much a consensus understanding. It might not be unanimous, but it's pretty much consensus that he is this year's MVP for the regular season in the NBA. He certainly earned that right to be called that thus far. He still has a month and change remaining, but I doubt that he's going to let it slip through his fingers again.
At the recent Sloan Analytics Conference in Boston, saying James Harden might be the greatest ISO player ever. Stephen A. Smith, do you agree?
Well, before Stephen A. answers, I'm going to answer. Obviously, the answer is no. James Harden is not the greatest ISO player of all time. ISO meaning one-on-one. No, he is not. He's a great isolation offensive player today. He's one of the top 3 isolation players in the game today. But I don't even believe that he's the best one-on-one offensive player in the league right now. In my view, number 1 will be Kyrie Irving. Number 2 will be Kevin Durant. And then number 3, I will put James. All time, of course, the greatest ISO player is Michael Jordan. That's of the players that I've seen. I'd put him number 1. Number 2, I'd probably say Kobe, with an honorable mention to Allen Iverson. I would probably have Allen Iverson and Kobe Bryant tied as the second best isolation players that I've seen. But James Harden is certainly not the greatest isolation player of all time. Hell no. He's not even the best isolation player today.
No, I'm going to go with Michael Jordan. I'm sorry, that's just me. I know that's sacrilegious. I mean, how dare me imply that Michael Jordan might be the greatest isolation player of all time. I mean, Daryl Morey, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I mean, why would I think that Michael Jordan would come before James Harden? Because the blasphemy, okay, coming out of my mouth. I mean, please, give me a break. James Harden is a superstar. He's my league MVP. He's absolutely spectacular. I'm going to put names like Jordan and Kobe ahead of him. I'm going to take into account today's game, the lack of physicality that exists in it, which was evidenced last night by Denver defending against him. Those were some ticky-tack fouls that got called against some of Denver's defenders.
James Harden gets the most touch fouls of any player I've ever seen in NBA history. I've never seen a player in NBA history that has gotten more touch fouls going to the basket than James Harden, or even pulling up for jump shots. He must have some naked photos of the head of the Referees Association or something. I don't know. But that man gets an unbelievable amount of calls. But once again, no, he's not the greatest ISO player of all time. And to Stephen A's point, also in today's game, what makes it much easier to be a great one-on-one player is that you only have to beat one guy. Once you beat your lead defender, you drive the paint, and you pretty much have the bucket all to yourself. Because the 4-man and the 5-man who used to inhabit the paint to play defense, or who could recover and get back into the paint, because the men that they were guarding were right outside the paint, now they have to guard the 3-point line. Centers have to guard the 3-point line now. So there's so much space in the middle of the floor, in the middle of the paint now, much more than there was in the Jordan era or the Kobe era.
Going up against James Harden, you could see the frustration all over their body. It got to a point where they couldn't blow hot air in his direction because they might have got called for a foul. Because
why would they want to blow hot air in his direction, Stephen A? They're not Lance Stevenson or you talking to the camera.
Because of that, James Harden would be a star in any era.
I agree, and I've already stated this numerous times on this channel. I can't stand when some of these morons come on my channel talking about Larry Bird couldn't play today, or some of the cats 40 years old, 45, 50, 55 years old. Steph Curry couldn't play back in the 80s. I mean, it's so asinine. Great players would be great in any era because they would adapt. They'd be great in any era. They might not be as great because they would have to change their game to conform to the standards of the time. But they'd be great in any era. Jerry West would be great today. Steph Curry would be great in Jerry West's era. LeBron James would be great in the 80s. Larry Bird, believe it or not, will be great today. If Dirk Nowitzki can still be playing at 57 years old, however old he is, Larry Bird could dominate today, just like he did back in the 80s. You mean to tell me he could play against Alex English and George Gervin and Dominique Wilkins and Mark Aguirre and Adrian Dantley, all those players, but he can't play against these guys today? And that's not even counting all the PEDs and other forms of performance enhancers that these players are utilizing today that they didn't have back in the 80s.
As far as I'm concerned, because he's just that legit in terms of isolation players. The way I'm looking at him right now, that handling, the shooting ability, etc., I'd put him top 5 all time in terms of one of those for the specific category of isolation players.
I don't know about that, Steve. I don't know about that. I'll have to think about that. You're talking about the greatest all-time one-on-one isolation players in NBA history. I have to think about that. Because as I've already stated, I don't even think he's number one today. I would put Kyrie Irving, I would put KD, and I would arguably put LeBron one-on-one over James Harden. James Harden just disappears too much for my taste. And then you go back, you have Kobe, of course you have Michael. It will be a debate whether or not, in my view, I would put Dwayne Wade over him offensively. Now, when you talk about overall game, Dwayne Wade is above him. I saw Nick Wright on First Things First, and he was stating that in his view, James Harden is a top 5 all-time shooting guard. I don't know if I agree with that. On Nick Wright's list, he had Jordan, Kobe, Jerry West, and Dwayne Wade, and then James Harden. I personally would put Clyde Drexler over James Harden. Now, if James was able to get to a couple of finals, win one, I would probably put him over Clyde. But as of right now, I have to put Clyde over him. Clyde went to 3 finals, won 1.
I'm not trying to take anything away from him, but to call him the greatest ever, for Daryl Morey to say that, I would appreciate Daryl Morey at least taking into account what was allowed in the past defensively and what's not allowed now before making such a proclamation.
Well, he's not going to do that, Steve. Number one, he's the general manager of the Houston Rockets. He's going to stand up for his guy as he should. Beyond that, I'm sure Daryl Morey will retort your sentiment by stating, well, James Harden is one of the reasons, he's one of the prime movers that has instigated this era of basketball, of either the layup or the 3. I'm sure he'd tell you that.
I don't think Daryl Morey did that, but I don't blame him, because if I'm Daryl Morey, James Harden is my definition of Michael Jordan, because look at what James Harden has done for the Houston organization and for the career of Daryl Morey.
Well, I would say that he certainly helped Daryl Morey's career, but he hadn't done shit for the Rockets yet.
I don't blame Daryl Morey one bit for saying it, but I don't agree, respectfully.
Couple things wrong with what Daryl Morey said. In the first place, I'm going to nitpick the term greater. If he means better, you can argue it. You'll also lose that argument, but at least you can argue the point. But you're going to lose the greater argument very quickly. What do I mean by that? Steve and I bring it up from time to time because I think it's important. When you talk about measuring guys in their eras and between different eras. If you say, like take track and field, right? That's the one sport that's measured completely, objectively. It's no one's opinion. This guy ran the 100 meters in this amount of time. The lower the time, the faster the guy is, the better he is, right? Which means every top 10 sprinter in the world today is better than Jesse Owens. But would you come out and say the 8th best sprinter in the world today is greater than Jesse Owens? No, because when we say greater, we're talking about how they fared against their contemporaries. The game has changed, and so Harden has the three-point shot also in a way that Jordan didn't have, at least until later in Jordan's career, when he was a much better three-point shooter than James Harden's ever.
Well, no, that's not true, Max Kellerman. Michael Jordan was never a greater three-point shooter than James Harden. James Harden is a better three-point shooter than Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan had some higher percentages in the mid-90s when they moved the line in. Michael Jordan's forte was not taking threes. Now, in big spots, he would make the three. And that was one of the things that made him the greatest player of all time, is that the bigger the moment, the higher he would raise his game. James Harden is the opposite. He has huge games against the Orlando Magic in the regular season. He'll go into Denver and give you 45, 10, and 10. He'll play the Detroit Pistons and give you 51, 9, and 11, something like that, and make 10 threes, but get to the playoffs and have a game where he has 12 turnovers. Jordan was the opposite. He shoot 25% from three for the regular season and get to the finals and make 7 threes in one half in game one against the Portland Trail Blazers. But no, if we're being literal, no, Michael Jordan was never, at any point in his career, a better three-point shooter than James Harden. The NBA moved the line in 1994. Michael Jordan came back at the end of the 94-95 season. 95-96, he shot moderately well from the three-point line, 96-97. Then 97-98, they moved the line back because there were too many centers taking threes. They didn't want centers taking threes. They were trying to raise the scoring in the NBA because the NBA was starting to become very defensive in 1993. And the NBA was scared because Jordan was not in the league. Magic and Bird were gone. And they were worried that the league was going to get too defensive. They tried to move the line in. It resulted in too many centers taking long three-point shots. And they decided to get rid of or scrap that experiment in 1997. Jordan had a broken index finger that entire season. Also, the line was moved back. His three-point percentage went back down. That's the truth of the matter.
Harden's ever been, incidentally. But nevertheless, at first, Jordan wasn't hitting threes and all that. But Michael Jordan in his league was far more dominant. I would argue Kobe Bryant's more dominant. In fact,
Yeah, Kobe's far more dominant than James Harden. Like, that's not even close. It's not even close. Kobe Bryant was a dominant player in the 2000s. Michael Jordan was the dominant player of the late 80s into the 90s. James Harden, I would not call him a dominant player in the 2010s. He's still trying to find his way. There's a lot that goes into being dominant. You have to perform well in big games. James Harden still has not proven that he can do that. He's had some good stat games in the playoffs. Why? Because his usage rate is so high. But I need to see him have great games against big teams in big moments.
Now, although I know when people think ISO, they think a specific set of skills. But in fact, just like one-on-one, who do I think is more likely to score? Kevin Durant, LeBron James, or James Harden? I don't even think James Harden's the best ISO player, really, in today's game.
Agreed. And throw Kyrie Irving in there.
Let alone of all time. So that's one. And here's my other argument. By the way, I sound like I'm really anti-James Harden on this show.
I don't think you are, Max. I give you credit. I think that you're just very fair.
In fact,
when it comes to Harden.
In fact, I like James Harden a lot, and especially the way he's played defense better and better this year. He's no good in the pick and roll because he's defensively limited in certain ways. But I see him putting in effort. I see him defending the post much better.
Well, he has more energy. I stated this before. The reason why James Harden takes possessions off defensively, or used to, was because he wasn't getting much help on the offensive end. And number two, he just didn't have the conditioning to play on both sides of the ball with a high amount of intensity. I think he's in better condition this year. Also, he has help from Chris Paul, who has also inspired him to play harder on the defensive end.
He's made improvements there, and he's just a fantastic offensive player. But Stephen A., he's elite in one category physically, and that's deceleration. He can change direction, decelerate on a dime.
Well, that is a gift of his, but one of the reasons why he can decelerate so quickly is because he doesn't get much acceleration. James is not someone who gets to a very high top speed, so it's easy for him to decelerate. Where James, as Max Kellerman has pointed out, is gifted is at deceleration and changing direction. He's like the equivalent of a very shifty running back in the NFL. He's not going to run past guys in the secondary, but he can break through the line of scrimmage. He can get through that second layer of linebackers before he gets tackled. He's gifted that way.
Totally elite like that. But as I've said, that's like a change-up pitcher in baseball. He's not the athlete that Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant were. Doesn't run as fast, doesn't jump as high, that kind of stuff. And as a result, in the postseason, in the playoffs, when you're facing more good athletes, higher concentration of them on better teams with shorter rotations, and they have time to prepare for you and all that kind of stuff, then we find out who has the raw athletic ability, because that shows up in those circumstances more.
What also shows up in those circumstances is your ability to think under pressure. Once again, this is why I call Russell Westbrook Russell Westbrick. This is why I call James Harden James Hardhead. What the both of them have in common is that they put up gaudy, illustrious numbers in the regular season, and they get to the playoffs and they flame out. And the difference between their team and the opposing team is not necessarily that the other team has greater talent. It's oftentimes that the brain trust on the Rockets and the OKC Thunder fails them in crucial moments. Your lead guy has to be someone who can respond well under pressure, who can think under pressure, who is the head of an offensive system where he knows exactly where everyone is supposed to be so he can get them the ball on time in big moments. That's what set Jordan apart. Jordan told Steve Kerr before the play that, look, there's going to come a time where they're going to double me. You're going to be open. This is what people who are operating on a higher cognitive level, that's how their brain works. Could you see Russell Westbrook saying that to one of his teammates? He's not thinking that. He's thinking, if I get double team, I'm going to pull up for three over two guys. That's what Hardhead was thinking prior to this year. That's why it was important for them to bring in Chris Paul to act as a support system for him.
More. It's the reason, Greg Maddux was not the postseason pitcher that Sandy Koufax was, because Koufax had the hard cheese and Maddux had to trick you. I think part of James Harden's struggles in the playoffs have to do with that. Have to do with the fact that he is not quite the athlete that some of the others are. And that plays into the kind of ISO player you are too, because you got to be able to do it when it matters most. So I disagree. I love James Harden, and Daryl Morey did an amazing job.
You don't have to say you love James Harden just because you levied a very accurate assessment. I wouldn't even call it a criticism. It was just an assessment. James Harden's a great player. Like, I had some brothers sending me comments talking about they believe that James Harden is a 5-star player. I don't see it. I'm sorry. I give him 4, maybe 4.5 because of this season. I've seen improvement, particularly on the defensive end and with his conditioning. I will put him maybe at 4.5, but 5-star for me still LeBron, KD, Steph, Kawhi, when Kawhi is healthy. There's no other 5-star players in the NBA. As a matter of fact, if I was going to sneak somebody else in there, it wouldn't be Harden. It would be Anthony Davis.
Discovering just how undervalued James Harden was and maximizing that.
And I still can't sneak Anthony Davis in there yet. He has to show me a lot more in the playoffs first before I put him in there.
That, but he ain't the greatest ISO player of all time. He ain't the greatest ISO player in the game today.
That would be...
I have nothing else. I have nothing else to add, Molly.
Okay, well, that's a first. When we come back, Tiger...
Why Molly always talking slick to Stephen A? But anyway, it's very obvious who the greatest one-on-one basketball player was and still is. That's Michael Jordan. Number 2, as far as I've seen, I'd have a tie with Allen Iverson and Kobe Bryant. And then after that is whoever. Probably KD. KD and LeBron, Kyrie. And then the list goes on and on. But anyway, peace.